Hey guys, Spirit of the Lie here. This isn't exactly hot off the press, as the patch came out a couple of days ago now, but I thought we'd take a look at a round of balance changes that was dropped on Wednesday for either those of you that haven't seen the update or were looking for a bit of perspective on its impact. Now I should note, as of recording this, the patch has actually been rolled back due to some issues it created for console players, but even if it's not out again by the time this is posted, you'll at least have an idea of what's coming soon. The main theme this month was a lot of nerfs for the highest performers, and is basically the anti-power creep patch, as you'll notice a lot of the top civs in my recent best civs going into 2023 video make an appearance. That said, don't panic, Frank-only players, they have yet again managed to escape getting any changes. We'll start off with the big general change. The big one here is the armored and siege elephants had a bit of a stat reshuffling. They lost 10% and 12% of their HP respectively, which was offset by greater cavalry and elephant armor. That effectively means they're more resistant to things that are anti-cavalry and anti-elephant, like spears and camels, to offset the lower HP. Remember, they had and still have more HP than the battering ram in Castle Age, but take extra cavalry bonus damage, so this basically makes those units a bit more similar to each other. In the vast majority of cases where bonus damage isn't involved, then this will be a straight nerf. Though when those types of bonus damage are involved, then things should work out to be pretty similar to how they were before. For example, taking the numbers they give at face value, pikemen would have previously dealt 27 damage per attack to an armored elephant, meaning with 200 HP they needed 7.4 attacks to beat one. Now, using the current numbers, that changes to 23 damage against 180 HP, which is 7.8 attacks. Technically, you could argue this makes them even a little better against pikemen and similar units, but they're functionally extremely similar. Notably, they also reduced the ram armor on those units, which I find interesting as it means they're now weaker against those types of units. A few different things that do anti-ram bonus damage include many gunpowder units, scorpions, slingers, and quite a few types of ships. So quietly, all of those units just got a bit better against armored and siege elephants. Moving on to the civilization-specific changes, the first is to the Bohemians, which had the Hoofnitsa upgrade increased by 200 resources and the blast radius decreased from 0.8 to 0.7. This is on top of their attack and blast radius being reduced about a year ago. This seems like largely a closed map nerf, where Bohemians are in and out of top 5, and at this point you're paying 1900 resources for 10 HP, 10 attack, 25% more bonus damage against buildings, and a bit of an increase to their blast radius as well. It's definitely getting a little harder to justify the upgrade than in the olden days, and from the stats I've seen, Bohemians aren't necessarily all that good in late game closed maps, despite having a very good reputation. That does change a bit in the highest rated games, where they're number 1 on Arena lately for 1600 elo and up. So I assume this change comes from feedback in their inner circle that Bohemians can be broken or annoying to play against in some situations at a high elo. Next up, for the Burgundians, their discount on ecotechs moved from minus 40% to minus 33%, though remember they also get them 1 age earlier, so this is only part of that bonus. If we look at how much this saves for wheelbarrow and the food, wood, and gold upgrades, you can see in the early game this accounts for about a 30 food loss, and in the mid game probably about 50. I wouldn't call this a huge nerf, but I also wouldn't say that Burgundians really needed a particularly big one. They're a strong civilization for sure when you start throwing in cheaper stable techs and early Cavalier on top of Coustilier, and this is a pretty simple way to slow them down that I don't expect will end up having a huge impact. Next up, for the Gujars, they were actually buffed, which at first might sound strange, but these are corrections to just make things how they were intended. The first is the elite Chakram Thrower now deal +1 against Condottieri, which is a pretty niche situation. More importantly, they fixed some of the math behind how the Gujar's staggered bonus damage was calculated. We don't have to get too far into the weeds, but basically the way they did it was to add a new multiplier each age to increase it, so it should eventually get up to +40% in theory. But due to rounding that happened along the way, it ended up working out to be often less than expected in both Castle Age and especially Imperial. The change that was introduced just bumps up a lot of units, so they actually do the +30% in Castle Age and +40% bonus damage in Imperial that they were always intended. Effectively, this works out to being a +1 attack bonus for a handful of matchups, with heavy camels in particular being a bit of an outlier, now doing 1 less damage against cavalry. Moving on, a much bigger change was to the Hindustanis, who are seeing their discount on villagers being reduced to technically what it was way back in the day for the Indians in the Forgotten expansion. Arguably the biggest effect is in Dark Age, cutting the bonus in half, so it feels like they'll slow them down quite a bit from the get-go, spending probably 50-ish more food in Dark Age. That said, by the late game, the difference between 25% and a 20% discount is pretty small, as it's a great deal either way. Looking at the last 6 months, Hindustanis have actually been number 1 by win rate overall, and probably most notably being number 1 in 1v1 Arabia for 1200 elo and up. I imagine this nerf is going to have an effect on that, and could well be enough to give Franks the top spot again. Franks were already doing better in 1600 elo and up games, but Hindustanis were doing a bit better in the 1000 to 1600 elo range. Obviously, they flew too close to the sun, so it makes sense the devs want to restore order to the world and have Franks back indisputably at number 1 again. Even with this change though, remember Hindustanis have great camels in the Ghulam, so it's not like they were entirely reliant on a good economy in the first place, and I expect them to probably still be in the top 5. The final change was for the Poles, where they went from 10% to 8% of food automatically dropped off from a farm around a full work. This one feels like it's definitely targeting their very good win rate on closed maps. Admittedly, 8% is a bit of an awkward number, but with 10%, they're a little too good at the moment looking at their arena win rate, as much as it hurts me as a Poles fan to say that, and how much I like to keep bonuses strong to make civs feel unique. Remember, even if it is plus 8%, it's still better than having a plus 8% farming bonus, for example, because it's all front loaded, so you can spend it earlier and snowball the game. I'd say this probably puts them more in line with the Slavs plus 10% faster farming when you consider that effect. While on an individual farm basis, this is a very small change, with a fully surrounded full work of 8 farms, with Horse Collar we're talking about 40 less food dropped off, up to 88% less food instantly dropped off with crop rotation. This is on top of a reduction in their gold generation from stone mining a few months back, so you can see them slowly walking back some of the eco bonuses that they had at release. Now, aside from all of those changes, which at this point I think we can see were basically all nerfs to some top performing civs, there's also a few hints about what's to come. One major thing, of course, is going to be changes with consoles in mind, though supposedly there's the biggest patch ever coming down the pike, with the largest number of fixes and changes ever seen in a single update. I don't know whether to be nervous or excited for that, especially given the rollback that's happening in this patch, but overall I'd say I'm more excited, as balance changes always help keep the game fresh. The return of Rome DLC was also mentioned, but just in passing, and to say stay tuned, with the estimated timeline being now just sometime in the coming months. The best guess at what that is remains that it's a porting of AoE1 into AoE2 with quality of life features added, but almost 100% sure to be a separate game without crossplay between that and AoE2, which would be a bit of a mess. What this means for AoE2 though, and whether Western Romans are going to be added as a civilization, is still all speculation. Having had some time to think about it, personally, at this point, I'd even just be open to having a massive Western Roman campaign in AoE2 of 10 plus missions as Western Romans, being a new playable faction in that, but not being included in the regular 42 for online and player versus player games. Personally, I go back and forth about how much I care about Western Romans being pretty out of place in a medieval game versus how much I really do want to play them, and judging by the forums, there's a lot of debate about that topic. That'll do it for this one though. As always, I'm curious about your guys' opinions on the balance changes and speculation of what's coming down the road. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.